All right, welcome to Veritas Live, everyone. I'm your host, Demetrius Malbro. And in this episode of Veritas Live, we are exploring the rapid evolution of AI for both beneficial and malicious purposes, the current generative AI landscape, and we'll also touch on some best practices for implementation and predictions for the future of AI in data security. And we also just wrapped up our participation at KubeCon in Chicago last week. And I mean, it was fantastic to be with the open source community talking about data protection and resiliency in containerized environments. And I'm still trying to work off that deep dish pizza and that Chicago hot dog that I consumed while I was there. Now, we are also joined by our community manager, Ben Spickert, who will be engaging with you in the chat window. So don't be shy. Please post your questions for us to answer live in the chat. And I'm always excited to see where everyone is watching from. So please type in the chat window as well where you are watching from today. That's always exciting to see. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest, Christos Tulumba, Chief Information Security Officer right here at Veritas. How's it going, Christos?
Going great. Thanks for having me, Demetrius.
So, Christos, what is your favorite movie of all time? I mean, one that you have seen at least 5, 10, 15 times before.
I can say my favorite movie, being a native New Yorker, is Goodfellas. I grew up in Queens, New York. That movie hits home. Must have seen it over 100 times. Remember every single line by heart. We'll watch it every single time it's on.
All right, you might have to give us a line of that movie right now.
They're a little vulgar for this call.
All right. So my favorite movie is Gladiator with Russell Crowe. And I really love that movie because the action is always fantastic and it just carves out a little piece of history. So Gladiator is one of my all-time favorite movies. But let's get to some questions, Christos. So generative AI is this new platform shift that has captured the imaginations of companies all around the world. And I'm sure you may have already known this, or maybe the audience doesn't even know this. Did you know that ChatGPT was the fastest product to get to 100 million users? That's a lot of users. And also, Christos, what are the big concerns that you see from your perspective with generative AI platforms like ChatGPT?
Sure. So, we're in the very early stages of this, right? I'm very optimistic about what the future holds, and ChatGPT getting 100 million users in what 3 months, 4 months is that just kind of speaks to the level of adoption and the excitement around it, right? With that, we want to see the technology win, and we want to see it used for pretty much everything these days, right? And the way I look at it, there's really three different use cases.
Mm-hmm.
Around large language models and AI, right? I look at it from a consumer perspective, right? These are the ones you use in your personal life. Things like having a chat GPT account. Think of it like a large language model for an everyday user where you just chat back and forth. You're thinking about the risks associated with that as a consumer. You think about things like data privacy, confidentiality. You're processing large amounts of personal data. There's a big risk of the data being mishandled, leaked, or used inappropriately, leading to privacy breaches. Things like misinformation and manipulation are really accelerating, right? We're seeing this a lot now where, there's large language models out there that are really built and designed to deliver misinformation, right? Whether it's health advice, news dissemination, education. There's a lot of issues around that, things like bias and discrimination, and a lot of manipulation for malicious purposes. And just like any software, large language models have security vulnerabilities that can be exploited by attackers, leading to unauthorized access, right? So that's from a consumer perspective. Then you look at it from an employee perspective. This is, use cases for internal employees, right? Imagine an executive assistant in the finance group asking a large language model about corporate data finances. It could lead to sensitive data exposure, right? So, you really need to think about the risks associated with that. So, things like securing the underlying infrastructure at each layer, the APIs, the orchestration layer, and the data layer. Things like data security and data privacy sit at the top of the list. You train these models on internal business data that, it tends to include sensitive information, right? So there's an increased risk of data leakage and exfiltration. Insider threats become a bigger one at that point, right? Your employees have access, well, I should say the employees that have access to these large language models could potentially misuse it for unauthorized purposes, inadvertently causing data breaches, so implementing stricter controls around that is very important. The LLM itself, right? The underlying data model could be a target for theft. So wrapping controls around that and making sure that data is isolated and saved, is essential. It becomes a fundamental piece to your security program. And then, there's other risks as well, but there's also the customer side, right? So, this is a software vendor, for example, has a feature, product, or service that the customers consume, right? So when you think about AI usage in that perspective, right, your developers want to use these large language models and predictive text to help accelerate code and deployments, right? But things like code quality and reliability, that sits at the top of the list, right? There's a risk of introducing bugs or inefficient code if the output isn't reviewed properly and tested. Automatically generated code can include security vulnerabilities. If you're not wrapping a secure development lifecycle around it, it becomes a much larger issue, right? So making sure that you're integrating code with a thorough review process becomes critically important, right? So my advice is really for any organization looking to adopt, be excited, right? Be open, but also be cautiously optimistic. Look at your use cases, how you're planning on applying the technology, build out your security program based on that.
Okay, excellent, fantastic. And also, Christos, as a CISO, how do you think about the considerations for enterprises looking to adopt these large language models? And maybe what are some of the best practices that companies should implement to reduce the cyber risk around these large language models that they are looking at?
Sure. So, going back to the previous question, right? Understanding your use case and what it is that your organization wants to do becomes important, right? But fundamentally speaking, there are certain building blocks that should be implemented no matter what you're doing, right? So things like data privacy and protection, right? Understanding what your governance structure is around large language models, what you can and can't do, what privacy regulations you need to adhere to, and making sure the data that you use is anonymous, and you're leveraging the proper anonymization techniques, when necessary. Performing regular security audits and updates, right? That's a really big one that's often overlooked. Make sure all of your software, all of your hardware is protected against known vulnerabilities. Access control becomes critically important, right? Understanding who can leverage, what data, what do they have access to that they can use. Things like training becomes critically important. Providing training for your internal employees can be often overlooked, right? A lot of people just do it around phishing training, but the more this gets adopted, it becomes critical that your end users understand how to securely and ethically use large language models in their day-to-day life. Making sure that they're aware of the risks, they're aware of privacy regulations, and how to really leverage these tools becomes important. From a security perspective, monitoring and logging, that's like any security program, that's always at the top of the list, right? But continuously monitoring the usage, maintaining logs and interactions, proactively identifying threats or suspicious activities, is of utmost importance. And from a development perspective, reviewing and validating the outputs of these large language models, right? Understanding that it's not the end all be all. They're not always going to be accurate. So understanding if you're getting the right information out of this large language model, if you're not introducing additional vulnerabilities due to using this technology, it becomes, critically important. So understanding, having that filter or that backstop in place to really monitor your usage and validate the output becomes critically important, right? Then you go into things like, vendors, right? Every vendor under the sun is building out an AI tool, right? And they're going to get adopted and they're going to get adopted quick. So, having a proper vendor risk management program where you vet, what controls do these companies have in place? How are they managing your data? And are they up to your organization security standards, both contractually and in practice? Like I said, you look at the use cases, you build out kind of your framework from the ground up, use these building blocks, then kind of build based on your use case.
Okay, now you're mentioning the human element, which is sometimes what we tend to forget about, because we're talking AI, so we're thinking robots and we're thinking all this automation and how they're going to become sentient, et cetera. But education, you mentioned, is something that's super critical, and also the training aspect of it, because phishing and social engineering is something that we continue to see to this day. So I appreciate you mentioning that, and that is great information. But thinking of the human element, Christos, what is next, you think, for cyber criminals, and how are you seeing cyber criminals using AI today for different types of cyber attacks? Like, I know there's one called Worm GPT, and then there's also some AI generated phishing.
Yeah, I mean, right now, excuse me, phishing is really the big one. Things like social engineering, um, AI has made it very easy, extremely easy to circumvent controls, right? They can make emails, they can make phone calls, spoof text messages that look unbelievably sophisticated and accurate. We're seeing a huge increase in phishing attacks along the way, right? And I don't want to say it's an uphill battle, but we need to be, as a security team, we need to be on top of all emails, all communications coming in and out, and really educate our end users on how to properly spot these messages, because they are getting more sophisticated. But it just starts there, right? And I always say technology wins, right? And throughout history, if you look at technology, not just when it comes to IT, but overall, technology always wins, right? And the most important thing is adopting on both sides, right? With this in particular in AI, there's the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are trying to use it for good purposes, but the bad guys are using it for malicious purposes. They have no guardrails in place. There's no ethics. There's no morals, right?
Right.
And if you look at the scale at which these cybercrime organizations are growing, right? They're almost run like Fortune 500 companies. They have the resources now to really build out really sophisticated algorithms that can do a lot. And we're in the very early stages of this, right? But I can almost guarantee that they are not slowing down development on anything in their toolkit. I'm personally concerned about ransomware, kind of adapting on the fly, doing things like automatic learning, right? So imagine a world where, a piece of malware gets on your machine, it automatically identifies targets, it customizes an attack, customizes the delivery and execution of it. It understands what controls you have in place and evades detection. It becomes really interesting. And I know it's a little, sci-fi-esque, but I think we're really starting to hit that, and we need to be on top of it, right? And I don't think it changes our approach, but I think it definitely, well, it may change our approach, but fundamentally, making sure we have all the right controls in place around each of these things, that's the only way we can beat it, right? Everybody in the world is going to try to sell you an AI detection product, right? And it's going to continue to happen. The bad guys are going to know about these products and try to find ways to circumvent it. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, right? But it's not something we could ignore, and it is going to happen fast, and the technology will win.
Yeah, and it's moving really fast. Just as you mentioned as well, I know OpenAI just rolled out some new updates, and they have GPTs now where you can go in and kind of do some low code, no code, click and point. You can tell the model to kind of create your own little GPT to give you some information that you need. You also maybe touched on this just a little bit about AI driven attacks, but do you see a world where there are like end-to-end AI-driven ransomware attacks?
Absolutely. Listen, if I'm a cyber criminal, that's the only thing I'm working on right now, because I think that's going to be the biggest advantage, right? AI is all about data, right? And over the years, we've seen, the data collection points and data attacks and data exfiltration, at an all-time high, right? It's the bad guys that have this data. They understand network maps, they understand personalities, they have dossiers on people where they can build profiles and selectively target based on what they know about this persona. It's only going to build from there, right? The more data that they have, the more targeted an attack will get and the more adaptive they can be. It's going to be very difficult for us as security folks to protect against that, right? So we need to adopt the same approach. We need to leverage AI as best we can. We need to understand, how can we use AI for things like threat detection? How can we be a little bit more proactive in this world to help identify those threats? I can guarantee we're going to see a world where automation is the key. It's not even a question to me at this point.
Okay, fantastic. And it looks like a question just came in from the chat. So they're asking, how do you start a career in cybersecurity? And I'm looking to hear your comments on this because there's so many different paths that you can take. But I want to hear from you, Christos. What do you think we maybe anyone who wants to start a new career in cybersecurity?
Yeah, listen, the beauty of cybersecurity is it's constantly evolving, right? And if you're into technology and you're into learning and adapting and understanding, this is the path for you. The reason I got into cybersecurity to begin with, this is 25 years ago. I've been doing this. And, at
Wow.
the time, I just wanted to cause trouble on the internet and introduce bugs and all that. And I was lucky enough to be able to create a career out of this because I was passionate about it. I was constantly learning, that it takes a certain mindset to understand the behavior of an attacker and the behavior of someone that wants to be malicious, right? But if you
Mm-hmm.
have the passion to do that, there's any number of career paths you can take, right? There's folks that are coming out of college that just want to, they want to look at threats and understand the threat landscape. You can go get a job in a SOC, analyzing events, and that gives you a really good understanding of the threat landscape, right? You can get into things like web application security, you can get the API security, infrastructure. There's a lot of different paths you can take. I think the one thing that ties them all together is having a passion and understanding of the world, right? I think if you
Mm-hmm.
want to grow in this field or even just to get started, right, having that base set of knowledge, going on interviews and kind of showcasing, here's what I know and here's what I want to get into, I think that's a leg up, right? There's plenty of folks that want to get into security, but they're not willing to adapt in their ways. That this isn't the career for you if that's your position, right? It's you need to be able to adapt, you need to be able to think quick, learn, and constantly learn, right? 25 years in the business, and I'm still learning on a day-to-day basis, right? This came out last year, and it's expanded my career, quite frankly, right? There's a lot to learn and a lot to understand. So keep learning, keep educating. That's the way.
Wow, you sure you've done 25 years? I don't see any gray hairs. I see a couple of beard, but
That's the
man.
one thing I got going for me.
And Christos, was it even called cybersecurity back then, or was it just called information? What was it called back then?
No, it wasn't. It was all under the guise of information systems.
Okay.
It was really more, network administration, system administration, and kind of expanding from there. But there was
Okay.
no not cybersecurity as we know it now. It was, plain old application security guys, and that's pretty much it. But it evolved very, very quickly.
Got it. Got it. And also, how do you see companies leveraging some of the new AI technologies to, let's say, stay ahead of these cyber criminals in the future? Because that's super critical, and you already know that they're working sophisticatedly. Even if that's a word, I'm not even sure if that's a word or not, but they're working in order to build that next ransomware variant. So how do we stay ahead of this?
They are right, and I think we have to take a very similar approach, right? If you look at the cyber kill chain and every stage of it,
Yeah.
like that doesn't change, right? There's still going to be the 7 stages of the kill chain, and at each one of these things, you need to understand how you can use AI to your advantage, right? So things like predictive analytics, being able to analyze tons and tons of data, identify patterns, and identify security breaches before they occur. That makes you proactive in identifying, right? Things like anomaly detection, looking at all of the data, all of your logs, building out your baseline and looking for specific thresholds, allowing AI to build those thresholds for you, to identify those anomalies and respond. Again, automated response, right? If you think about the kill chain, it's identifying, detect, respond, right? It's having the tools to be able to do automated response, leveraging things like threat intelligence and aggregating multiple data sources to analyze and look for threats proactively become critical. Better authentication, and I can't stress this enough. Things like biometrics, behavior analytics, user behavior analytics. AI is it's kind of built for that, right? It's really built for things like user behavior analytics, identifying threats before they happen, identifying kind of out of band behavior and putting a stop to that quickly without any user interaction is huge. Things like phishing detection too, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
using things like Worm GPT and GPT models to build their, kind of their social engineering attacks. We need to be doing the same thing, right? Analyzing things on the fly, building out these big data models, and kind of building from there. At the end of the day, I really believe this data wins, right? It's the people that compile the largest data sets and the more data you can work with, the better, right? Understanding how to manipulate that data and extract what you want is the key to winning this, right? So, making sure all of your systems are constantly audited, logged, monitored, analyzing that. That's what's going to allow you to keep out. I don't know if it'll make us stay ahead, but we'll definitely be able to keep up with the attackers.
Got it. And I love that phrase. You said at the end of the day, data wins, but you got to make sure that data is protected. You got to do things like MFA, right? I still hear multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication is still not turned on, and companies are still slowly turning those things on. And I just continue to read phishing attacks and social engineering attacks as well. So there's still some training out there, and also Christos, any closing remarks or anything that you would like the audience to really walk away from this episode with?
Yeah, I mean, look, for anybody looking to adopt the technology, I always say, I go back to the first question, right? Understand your use case, plain and simple. Understand what it is that you're driving towards as a business that's going to help you, and then build out your framework from there, right? What I often see is, security teams or businesses in general, they'll try to boil the ocean and not focus on a particular problem, right? We don't have that luxury with AI. We just don't, right? We need to understand our use cases. We need to understand the fundamental components to building out a proper AI and LLM program and really build on there. Like I said, managing your data, access control, data protection, those are the critical components to any security program, right? And when it comes to AI, those are hands down the most critical pieces.
All right, Christos, I do appreciate it. And also, I would like to let everyone out there in the audience know that we are at Microsoft Ignite this week. So please chat with us online. And if you are in Seattle, please stop by and say hello. We are located at booth number 604. We are also at AWS reInvent that's coming up as well, November the 27th through December the 1st, halls AC, and that is booth 1350. And last but not least, we would like to acknowledge all of those in India and around the world celebrating Diwali. So have a safe and prosperous week, everyone. And until next time, stay secure and back up often.